types of analysis and management views on practically every space program here in Huntsville. He retired from NASA in 1988. He's now working with Grumman on the level 2 systems integration for the space station program. So hopefully he'll have some insights into that. But particularly, he's going to give us some of the lessons and guidelines that he's accumulated over many, many years of managing the space program. My background's a little different than Dick's. I didn't spend a lot of time up in the head shed, but I spent a lot of time critiquing what went on in the head shed. And so I have a lot of interesting things that certainly I recall. And I didn't know Dick was going to be on this session when I showed up this morning, so nobody told me. But I had thought that I might mention some things that we had gotten into as we went along, but I still recall some stories that you didn't mention. And I also have a little different perspective of some of the things that you did mention. All right, I'm going to begin basically, we're talking about development on the fast track. I'm going to begin basically by looking at some of the things that we do when we initiate a development program. And it all starts, for instance, with the RFP. And right away, in all the recent programs that I have been involved with, particularly in space station, we find right away we shoot ourselves in the foot when we begin. May I have the first slide, please? First thing has to do with the RFP. When we received the RFPs from on space station from Martin Marietta and the Boeing Company, they were delivered on a flatbed truck. And they drove up in front of 4200 and somehow or other they got all this stuff off. I mean, it was a huge amount of paper. And it took a large number of people to review all the paper that came in. And it was working a while ago, fellas. Okay. And the first thing that I want to call to your attention, and I pulled out a lot of interesting data from various programs in the past. First thing right up at the top, the government RFP for the Gemini program was only 12 pages long. Now, I don't think any of you in here worked on the Gemini program, but it was a good program. Got the job done, did what it was supposed to do. Now, I don't know of any reason why any RFP that comes out today on any program, including space station, should be longer than 12 pages. If you want to start off on the right foot, go that way. And basically what it said was that a functional requirement of whatever Gemini was supposed to do, was supposed to have 2 guys put them in orbit, and the mission lasts so and so long, and so specs were applicable. And that's all that it was. And Martin Marietta eventually got through the program, and they did a good job. The second item is applicable government studies should not be a part of that RFP. I went to work on space station in the spring of 1985. There were various predecessors of that particular activity that had been going back 10 years when I came on board in 1985. By the time we got around to RFP time, everything that had been done prior to 1985 had been scrapped. And if you look at where we are now, everything that was done prior to the RFP was scrapped also. The way technology is moving today, it serves no purpose to try to hang on the back end of something old technology or old studies. It just doesn't work. You spend all that time and all that effort, and you are basically nailed to the floor. You cannot move with what you've got. Include applicable standards and allow equivalence. One of the things that we found out in various cost activities is that when you impose government standards on a contractor, you are going to cost yourself some extra money. And one of the things that I found out was that I could go in any contractor shop, go down the hall, and I could do these kind of things because nobody knows me when I go into the contractor operations. I get an unescorted badge, that's what I do. I go down the hall and find out who's here. And I found out that every contractor, every major aerospace contractor that I know has a better set of specifications than the government does, either military or NASA. For one thing, they have people and that's all they do. They do it full time. And their specs are better, more up to date, more current, everything that you ever need. So the thing to do is to say you want paragraph such and such out of Mill Standard 587B and or equivalent. And let the contractor come back and propose these things. Save you money every time. And he becomes self-contained. Second thing, the next thing you want to talk about is include a functional description. And that was all that was in the Gemini RFP. Just a functional description. A two-man capsule basically was what they wanted. And that's what we got. To go down to the details, what you really want, how you want it done, what you end up doing was micromanaging. My daddy always told me that two heads are better than one, even if one of them is wooden. So let the contractor do his own thing. Don't tell him what to do. Just tell him what you want. Don't tell him how to do it. And maximize the opportunity for innovative response. That's basically the ground rule that you want to stay with. I want to call your attention to one thing. Some of you remember this thing. When Boeing came to town to do the S1C stage, one of the things that had been giving me fits, and I had been working with instructors, people, and so on and so forth, and what we didn't know how to do was to attach the bulkheads to that aluminum cylinder. The problem was one of welding technology. We did not yet know how to weld 1-inch aluminum. It doesn't sound like much of a problem now, but at least at that time here at Huntsville and Marshall Space Flight Center, we didn't know how to do that. And we had some designs that I was just sure as soon as we put pressure on them, crack, come apart. Boeing came in with a proposal, and they knew how to do it. And they took our proposal, their proposal, prepared it, and Boeing made the Marshall people look pretty silly. I was part of that operation. And the contractor confronted the customer. He was right, and he won his case. I don't know any contractor today that would have the moxie to do what Boeing did back then. They roll over every time the customer says, that's not what the government needs, that's not what NASA needs, that's not what the public needs. Excuse me, it's not what the public needs. It's called the Y ring. I think all of you guys around remember Boeing's Y ring. And that's the way the S1C was designed. Okay? Minimize the opportunities for micromanagement. Contractors in a lot of cases, engineers in a lot of cases, ask a lot of questions. Don't ever ask any, all you young folks here, don't ever ask any questions if you think you may not want to hear the answer. Just go ahead and do it. There are a number of things that I got an opportunity to do, and Dick was right, that had more responsibility and more authority as a GS9 a lot of times than you did, as a center director, where you can't do just so many things that you can't do. And I just think about one particular example that was involved in the Jupiter. The Jupiter had a requirement of 1,500 nautical miles range, fire in any direction from sea level. That included wrecking range. And you lose hundreds of miles if you start trying to plot fire to the west instead of to the east. But that was what the spec said. So I went to my boss, and at that time my responsibility was trying to figure out how to get the payload, how to get the range. And I said, there's no place on the surface of the earth that you can fire the Soviet Union from the equator in a due westerly direction. What is really the number? And they said, hey, that's a spec, and we're competing with the Thor, and we got to go ahead and do it. So I messed around, made a lot of calculations, came up with a lot of things to do. And we finally ended up with an engine that had a mixture ratio valve on it. We dropped this intermediate bulkhead about 3 inches so we could just cram the thing full of propellant. And check the lower mixture ratio a little bit, gave us a few more seconds of specific impulse. And I came up with 1,510 miles firing due west on the equator. So what I had to do was I had to go to Connie Dannenberg. Where's Connie? Connie's sitting here. He was sitting here. There you go, Connie. He was in charge of the change board at the time. Well, I didn't believe in this whole thing because I really didn't think it was necessary. But I had to go convince Connie, chairing the change board, that we had to make those changes. I was lying in my teeth, Connie. And So we convinced them, and we made those changes, and so on and so on. But where they actually put the Jupiter was in Brindisi, Italy, which is kind of up on top of the mountain. And of course, we were firing in a northeasterly direction. And so we had a lot of range surplus. It wasn't a year after they got those missiles over there, there was an Air Force captain showed up at my desk one day, and he says, "Are you the guy responsible for the internal ballistics and all the rate tables and all this stuff? And is it really true that you can get this kind of performance?" And what it was, he had a target sitting out here that was somewhere around 1,700 nautical miles away, and fired in that direction, that bird would make that distance. Okay, there was just one thing wrong. The range pod, something that was on there in the guidance area to improve the accuracy on target, would not go to that. It was all the way up against the stop and beyond in order to adjust the range pod to that particular setting. So this guy came in as Air Force captain. He wanted us to change the two panic resistors on each end of the range pod so they could get a little more range. So we went back to the change board, and Connie was sitting there. And he realized, I think at that time, what I had done to him, that I had lied to him, and got to make a change to go beyond it. And you talk about a withering look. I mean, I got a withering look. But the interesting thing about it was that the Air Force got their target. I don't know what that city was out there, and so on and so forth, but that was the kind of responsibility that I had. It works both ways. I was also the guy that came up with the idea of putting the standpipe with the early S1B stages, S1 stages. What we did was, I was trying to get all the propellant out of those 9 tanks at the same time so we get the maximum performance. So the theory was you blow all the liquid oxygen out of the center tank and get it out of the outdoor tanks and then let it go. So we had 30-inch standpipes in there. And the propellant was blowing out the system that we had. It was a very passive system. It didn't do anything. But just a few seconds, 10 seconds or so before the thing ran out of propellant, all the liquid oxygen would be in the outdoor tanks. The center tank would be in. So we hooked this thing up, got it set up on the test stand. You showed the picture of one of the test stands. And the thing was running along barely, working great. But somebody had forgot to tell me when we came up with the standpipe deal, probably going back up in the tank like that it was an insulating layer of warm cryogenic fluid that was up on top of the liquid oxygen. And when that thing got down to where it was being disturbed by that jet coming out of that standpipe, the pressure in the outboard tanks collapsed. Okay, and everything just went bonkers from that time on. They shut it down. I came back in the next day. That standpipe was crushed. Okay, just flattened. Was sitting right up in the middle of my desk. I already knew what had happened. And I also already knew that when you smash aluminum in liquid oxygen, you're just plain dumb lucky that it doesn't blow up. And that's what had happened. But lucky or not, it didn't blow up. We didn't lose any hardware. So I didn't know what was going to happen next. I expected that I might be fired. So I very gingerly picked that piece of aluminum up and I set it down over the corner. And nobody ever said a word to me. Nobody ever said a thing. I was never fussed at. Nobody mentioned it to me. Not my boss, not my boss's boss. Nobody said a word to me. And that thing sat in the corner for about a week. Then I took it out of the trash and got rid of it. And that was the end of that story. But I learned my lesson. I was responsible. Today, nobody takes any responsibility. And that's part of the problem. When everybody's looking over everybody's shoulder, it takes an awful lot of people to get a very puny job done. Okay. One of the things that, we'll drop this chart here shortly, one of the other things that I need to get across here, not only do you spend too much time, the contractor is spending billions of dollars preparing proposals, and a lot of them say, hey, I don't think I'm interested. I don't think I want to prepare this proposal. I don't think it's worth the effort. The second thing is, though, that the government spends an awful lot of time evaluating these proposals. to evaluate something like space station, you may spend 2 or 3 months, and you'll try to chew up hundreds of people. And it's just not worth the effort. Just not worth the effort. You already know what you need to do if you take the responsibility, but a lot of the paper that's required appears to be required for legal reasons. Okay, next time. Already been some discussion about TQM. I don't like TQM. The simple reason is that all of the examples that I have seen are not participative management. The assignments that the TQM people get into are for the most part assigned by management. Therefore, there's nothing any different than TQM than anything else. Management can always tell you what to do, and it's what you're there for. Okay. But in terms of classical quality circles, and in accordance with Deming's book, participative management is the key. And the fundamental assumption associated with participative management, the guy who knows the most about any given job is the guy who's doing it. Back to the same question. Give the individual the responsibility, let him go do it. He may screw up, but he won't screw up any worse than he would have without your help, because it's non-expert help to start with. Okay? And there you go. Next thing is that when you go into this concept of participative management, a lot of times the engineer will come and tell the manager something is wrong, or I made a mistake. By the way, that's part of the 6 most important words of the English language. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And every good engineer should know that. But the 4 most important words, so far as the manager needs to know, is what do you think? And then when he tells you something that you don't want to hear, don't cut his head off. That's the ancient Greek tradition. The bearer of bad news was beheaded. Okay. Next thing to remember is that when a manager becomes a manager, his IQ is suddenly not raised 50 points. The managers are not experts. They deal with experts. They consult experts. And when they hear something, they respond. I've got to tell you that the night before the Challenger launched, the propulsion expert that was there from the NASA side, I can call his name, some of you may know him, he never did agree to that launch. But nobody listened to him. The non-experts, the managers, decided to launch. And that was a mistake. That's what the expert was there for. The expert on any task may do it. I already said that. Super managers inspire employee indifference in bad times. This is a Japanese idea. The Japanese, in part, responds to the Deming philosophy in his book on quality circles and such. One of the things that they came up with is if you got a guy that seems like he knows everything and he's running things, and things go bad, times get bad, you're beset by Congress, you're beset by problems of development, etc., there's not enough money. If everybody thinks you're a genius, nobody will come help you. So the Japanese have the idea that the thing to do, even if you are smart, don't ever let on. If the employees think you're incompetent and times get bad, they'll run to help you because they're afraid to lose their jobs. And it's just some things to think about. You see a lot of young faces out here. You find yourself in these kind of places. Don't ever appear to be too smart. You may be shooting yourself in the foot. And TQM managers select issues and quality circles, employees do it. And these things need to be dealing with not only technical problems, not only working condition problems, but technical problems as well. A lot of times the way we are forced to do our job is the most inefficient way possible. Encourage suggestions. All organizations, I guess, that I know anything around here in town and everywhere I've been, you'll find a suggestion box. And the normal thing to do is that when this suggestion comes time to be evaluated, the guy who has the job of responding to that suggestion turns out to be the individual who should have thought it up in the first place because it's in his area of responsibility. And many times he would challenge it. One of the things that was done at Marshall Space Flight Center a few years ago, back when Jim Kingsbury was head of SD, was that he put out a ruling. He was trying to get rid of this business where the suggester was a lot of times being argued with for 6 months before anything happened. What he did was put out a ruling that says, if none of my managers can tell me within 30 days why I shouldn't do this, it's going to be done. And that speeded up the suggestions quite a bit. Don't argue with a suggestion, particularly if it's a fellow writing about something that you know something about. Maybe some specialty of his, or maybe some special whatever. But try to be positive in responses to this thing. In Japan, I think the average employee over there turns out about 10 suggestions per year. Somewhere between 10 and 20. The average worker in this country turns out 0.1 suggestions per year. In civil service, it's 0.01 suggestions per year. And the reason for that is the bureaucracy which attacks the suggestion. Encourage competition. One thing Dr. Von Braun did, anytime that something came up that required an immediate response, he would call all of his senior people in and tell them what the problem was and give them something like 30 days, sometimes it was a week, to come back with a suggestion about how that might be done. And a lot of times the suggestion that came back that was the best was not the guy who would be expected to be the so-called expert in that particular arena. And also a lot of times what would happen is that the individual who thought he was going to get to do that job turned out not to be the one because he didn't get the best suggestion. Okay? And if you take an individual and put him in a position and say, whatever comes down the pike in this particular area is going to be yours forevermore, he gets lazy. But if you tell him that somebody else, Joe Blow over here across the hall, who's got another division, it's not his responsibility, but you tell him that he has an opportunity to compete with you, then you're going to be a lot more effective in dealing with your problem. Bureaucracies are built because there is no competition internal to a bureaucracy. That's what it is. And as long as you can do whatever you want to, and you don't care about cost, you don't care about time, you do whatever you want to, things are okay. All right, next slide. One of the things you hear about the space station every time is that we got to have this big complex organization because it's a very complex program. That's not true. There's a standard way to handle these kind of problems that's been around since that document, Air Force 375-1, was published in 1956. The technique that's called out is problem decomposition. No human being can manage the whole space station program. What you do is you break it down into specific problems that are manageable by reasonably sized groups, and then you go from there. Now, the modern interpretation of this is what Boeing calls design-build teams. And this is what they use in developing their aircraft. And since they do that better than anybody else in the world, that's got to be a fairly good system. All right? And what they consist of is they got everything that they need to be self-contained. They got their own safety experts. They got their own quality expert, whatever they need in terms of manpower, skills, resources, whatever, to do their job. They're self-contained. Design team is really a microcosm of the Arsenal and Russian Institute. Back in the good old days that Dick and I like to talk about, at Redstone Arsenal, we had everything that we needed on board to do the job. The first S1C stage was built here. Saturn 1Bs were built here. We had manufacturing, we had testing, we had everything that we needed in order to do the job. And that's a typical so-called Arsenal concept. Russian institutes were the same way. The aircraft design that they did so well, okay, we call you designing group and so on and so forth, were really part of the Russian Institute. They owned their own manufacturing. Everything was totally self-contained. and the design team follows the same philosophy. And the purpose of systems engineering is not to produce more paper. The purpose of system engineering is to assure horizontal communication. Anytime you see system engineering set up on a contract to produce, a list of DRs, design documentation requirements, this long, they're not doing their job. They are there to ensure horizontal communication. Set them up, give them authority, just like you do the safety people, and make sure that design organization A knows what design organization B is doing, and they're going to meet. And in that way, when the pieces come together at the end, they will fit. Except for raises, only give the budget to the design team. A lot of cases, what is happening is that the design team today doesn't have any authority, at least the way the job is done locally, but you can control the authority very well by controlling raises, controlling budget. Ozymandias complex. One of the things that the build a safety organization, they like to see their own people sitting right outside their office. The safety manager likes to go. That's not where they should be. They should be out in the design teams. The safety guy, the system engineering guy, or reliability guy is sitting at his desk. He's at the wrong place. He should be out in the design team. Okay, the Ozymandias, you may recall the poem written by a Romantic poet, not because he was a lover of Romantic literature and poetry. A poem called Ozymandias had to do with the fact that this king left a monument that had written on the side of it, all the great and wonderful things that he had done. And by the time the monument was found in the 18th century, the only thing that was left, all the things he claimed to have created, was just sand as far as the eye can see. And that's what our empires that we build in aerospace tend to do. If we try to build an empire, what will happen? We will turn to sand. Going with design teams takes 4 years and $4 billion to build a new jet liner. In other words, from the time they get the first order to the time they get around to rolling out the first aircraft ready to go, 4 years. Now, going without design teams on space station, 5.5 years have passed now, and we don't have, as far as I know, a complete set of manufacturing drawings yet. And I don't know how long it's going to take. And I'll get into why they don't have design teams right now. Ford took 6 years and $6 billion to develop the Escort, the smallest car Ford builds. Okay, and they haven't made any money off the thing yet. They're still trying to recover their initial cost. Chrysler now using design teams. I can't tell you what kind of car they're going to have, but they say that they're on budget and on schedule to do the same job in 3 years, $1.3 billion. And these guys, the airplane business, the car business, is spending the same kind of dollars that the aerospace people are spending. Next slide, please. Okay, what happens when you get the design team is you get an organization that looks like this. I would see about 50 people in each one of these things. Now, the first thing that happens is, we were all taught the same way. First thing that happens is the director says, I got too many people reporting to me. And he immediately becomes somewhat disturbed. Okay. Next slide. What we really, and this is a result of that. He sees the communication problem. Next slide. What we really should be shooting for is the autonomous team. Now, what happens is when you start a new program, that you get some managers and a director and maybe a few engineers. But most of these spaces, like this, for 1,000 people, you probably find that once you start off, there's 900 vacancies. And you build these teams, basically, what I want to say, at random. It's just pure dumb luck that one of them turns out to be good. Okay. What you need to do is to, instead of transferring individuals, transfer whole groups into the organization. An entity that has that responsibility, has that skill, and functions. I don't care whether you have to bring them from Seattle to Denver, or wherever you got to bring them and put them in the organization to make it work, so that that organization is able to work and function the first day they show up on the job. No time for learning. Okay, let's look at the next slide. What we end up doing, though, is we end up creating a thing like this because we can't handle communication, and we will not stand the groups properly. So we pick the director and the managers, and still we have all the vacancies. The problem is that each one of those managers, which now carries most of the load, he only knows 25% of what's going on, and the other 75% is with the other managers. And I guarantee you, on the basis of odds, one of those managers is another. And so the fact is that we organize deliberately so that we can't get anything done. And sometimes some of those smaller groups down there, maybe they'll work there, but most of them won't. See a lot of young people coming in, giving a lot of responsibility and not much leadership. And it'll take the time for them to learn what to do, just like it took some time for us. But the main thing is that this Christmas tree organization is typically what the government does now. Boeing knows to use design build teams, but what they have done on space station is they've got an organization that looks like this, and you ask them what the difference is. I mean, why is that the case? And they say, well, we have to organize like the government does. The fact is that the government organizes that way primarily to protect grades. Primary thing. It's not when we're working right, the government's working right, it doesn't act that way. It looks that way, but it doesn't act that way. And we had that same kind of Christmas tree organization when we came up, but it looked that way, it didn't act that way. And it's a mistake to think that you can get anything done through that kind of organization. You look that way, you don't act that way. Next slide. Computers. We didn't have much of that computers back in the Apollo program. Didn't have much at all. One of the jobs that I told you about that I had was trying to figure out how to get those 9 tanks in at the same time. And one of the things that I was told to do when we got around to producing a model of how those actually what it turned out to be several U-tubes hooked up together, the world's largest U-tubes in effect. And so I had to come up with a math model. And what I was told to do was that there was a new doctor, something or other, over at Comp Lab, and he was available, so I was supposed to take that problem with him and then solve the problem for him. They kept the thing about 2 months. I didn't hear anything from him, and I was getting desperate to get something into my computer program. And so I checked it over, and he said the problem is unsolvable. And that was the official word that I got back. And I heard that answer that morning. And so that afternoon, I was supposed to catch a plane to go to Los Angeles. I sat down and wrote out the equation. I'm an analog programmer. You program an analog computer, you can program anything. And so I sat down and wrote out relaxation solutions to the problem, gave it to one of my engineers, and told him to carry it down to this computer. We had 8K of memory. It took up the whole room. And anyway, I told him to carry it over there and put it on that machine, and he should have it working when I got back on Friday. And he did. And the beauty of the thing is, though, that there are 2 things that happened. One of them was that the initial approach was to take responsibility away from the responsible engineer. And that was a bad thing. And the second thing was that when we finally got it right, we didn't require very much in the way of a computer. I could easily solve that whole thing on the desk computer today, no problem. But what we're using, the Ford Motor Company now is saying, recently put out for public consumption, that all the computers that they bought will only increase their productivity 2%. I don't believe that. I believe it's probably a net loss, because what we're producing with our computers is paper. The 2 most common used computer programs in any aerospace engineering company in the country is a word processor and a database, typing and filing. That is not engineering, and that's where we're screwed up. You got to get those things off the computers that employees use. The only thing they should have on there is spreadsheet.
It's gotten worse. I've gotten email, 25 messages a day coming at me.
That's another thing that I haven't talked very much about email, but I mentioned it down there on the last line. You can see emails, local area networks, fax, and so forth. It's communicating engineer net. What happens is now, every engineer who wants to send a message, he uses a standard distribution. The printers in the offices where I work, okay, are running for the first hour every morning, coming up with email. And most of it is something that nobody ever reads. Okay, and you're absolutely right. And I'm looking at it from a different purpose. I was talking about generating paper, but the paper that you come in that you have to read it, you don't have time to. And most of it is absolutely worthless. Okay, pretty paper. Computers can do it marvelous. These are the world's ugliest slides. I did this deliberately because I was going to get to this point. Okay, I did these myself. I did them in Courier, did them in standard point size, and the way I get them up to slide size is I run them through the Xerox at 130% amplification, and it comes right up. Okay, but the point is it's cheap, fast. Fonts. If you had asked the average Apollo engineer what kind of font he preferred, he probably said blonde. We did not know what a font was. Okay, and I heard two engineers standing in the hall a couple of months ago talking about what was the best kind of font to use for a presentation paper. Engineers should not ever know about such things. I know of another organization that has fewer than 100 people in it. They have a daily report, a weekly report, bi-weekly report, monthly report, quarterly report. That is no lie. That is a flat truth. Roughly 30% of their engineering manpower is used to produce all that paper. And the corporate look is what is described as important. And you want to know where your money goes? It goes to stuff like that. If you have an engineering problem and you can't work it on the back of a piece of paper, then you better get out a textbook and do some study. Get it back to an envelope like that. Okay. And I've already said about the word processors in the database. I carry my briefcase all the time. I didn't have it with me this morning. I don't carry a slide rule anymore. I've got a Lumen, the cheapest calculator, cheapest engineering calculator that Texas Instruments produces. And that's what I carry with me to do what I need to do. I would never think about using anything else. It's a little small, so it's easier to carry than a slide rule. I might still carry it. Okay. And I can solve any kind of problem almost that comes up. I talked about POGO and some of these other kinds of things. Okay. And one of the things I've also included, one of the absolute evils in controlling costs is copying machines. Again, you get a lot of paper that you can't read. It goes along. You don't have time to read it. If you didn't have time to read it, it wouldn't be worth anything. Okay. And so we have those kind of problems to deal with. But go back and look what you're doing with your computers. Look at what your people are doing with the computers. And say, what does this have to do with engineering? And you'll frankly find that at least 90% of it has absolutely nothing. And your people are spending 6 and 7 and sometimes 10 hours a day working on those computers. And that's where your money's going. All right, next slide. This is the last one. Back to the customer again. The program only needs one customer. I know one program that fairly recently started off, didn't have any customers, and went out trying to find more customers. In the first quarterly review, roughly 80% of their money that the extra was 25% that was added to the thing was gone. It was spent trying to attract more customers. What happens is that when you go out and try to do everything for everybody, the cost of each person goes up so high. Nobody wants it. Nobody can afford it. What you need on every program is a nasty, mean old requirements manager that says, this I can do easily. Dick talked a while ago about the things that we did to improve the payload on the Saturn V. We started off with a requirement of 85,000 pounds. And it was part of my job back in those early days to keep tweaking that thing. I carry a list around with me all the time, all the things we can do to improve payload. Some of them were analytical, and I got a little smarter as we went along. And some of them required some minor hardware changes. Most of the things that we did were very, very low cost. But we kept trying and trying and trying. The shuttle is the only launch vehicle that I know of that from day one, its payload has continued to decrease. Started off at 65,000 pounds, and it's been hovering around 35,000 for the last several years. And that's not the way to run a railroad. You've got to have that product improvement going at the same time, except only real requirements. Space Station had a requirement for a long time that said no venting. What the astronomers were really looking for was a very low column density. In other words, no venting that would affect what they were doing. Back in the early days of Schedule B, or Phase B, part of the program, we ran a study with Lewis, and what we found out was that we could use thrusters that would, in fact, if you had a 300-to-1 expansion ratio and a few other things like this, that you could actually aim the gases that you vented, and they would never end up out in the viewing area, which is really a 6-degree half-angle cone. So the fact is, what you can specify as column density, don't tell the engineer how to do his job. It turns out there are a lot of ways to handle that kind of problem. Mistakes are opportunities. A lot of things that NASA has been doing is try to avoid development mistakes. That's not the way to go. Some of your best work you do after you've made a mistake. Classic example, 1934, Glenn L. Martin went out and sold the idea of the China Clipper. And he had him to buy a bunch of these things. Well, not a bunch, but several of them. And they got in and started designing on the things. And when they were well along, they found out they did not have a place to put the gas tanks. It accounted for the weight, but there was no volume inside. He skinnied the thing down to the point that they were trying to minimize the drag and all this kind of stuff. What he finally came up with to solve the problem was something called sponsons. And we ever noticed about these little stubby wings off the bottom of the thing, you know. And use those instead of the outboard floats on the aircraft. And it was, like I say, a seaplane. The drag stayed the same. The lift increased, and he actually got a performance increase out of adding these sponsons, putting gas tanks in there. About 2 years later, in the meantime, Boeing had been working on the B-17, and they were building these bombers on speculation. The government wasn't paying for them, so they decided to go into another business. But guess what was on the bottom of this Boeing seaplane, the 314? Sponsons. Martin's mistake showed up as an improvement on the Boeing seaplane. And one of the things that you need to do, and I'd like to tell you more about this, but history is very important. Look and see how other people have done things in the past. It's very important. And don't repeat other people's mistakes. By the way, that Boeing 314 aircraft seaplane was placed in service 52 years by BOAC 52 years ago yesterday. I remember the day. Okay. Profit for the mistakes of others. We talked about this morning. Dick and I were involved in this thing. And I've taken too long. But what do you do after you've been struck by lightning? I skipped one. I'll get back to it. What do you do after you've been struck by lightning? We had a problem that created some friction between the old Astronautics Laboratory and the old PVE organization back in the Saturn program. We spent an awful lot of effort to paint these things up real pretty. The hard piece of hardware that were coming in on Saturn V, paint job had to be just perfect, all kinds of inspection and everything. But when they were delivered on 4487, the guys would go there and start scraping the paint off of it. And they were trying to make a better ground. And we were complaining, because we spent all this time and effort, and we didn't see the resistances they were measuring, something like 10 to the minus 8 ohms. And we didn't see the reason for that kind of stuff. They were messing up our paint job. Well, a few years later, we were flying some of these things, and Apollo 12, by that time I was chairing the flight evaluation working group, I thought, story. Anyway, Apollo 12 took off about 30 seconds after liftoff. It was struck by lightning. It had not lightning in the area for 24 hours preceding that. Nobody expected it. It was a very great surprise. The interesting thing about a lightning bolt is that it typically runs 100, 150,000 amps. So when it went across these interfaces, the guy that scraped off all the paint off with 10 to minus 8 ohms, it hardly did anything. It set a couple of bits on the first strike. There was actually 2 other strikes which were smaller, and there's some little noise showed up on the data. So one comp cycle after that, it disappeared. There was no effect whatsoever, and we hadn't seen the lightning hit the ground. It would have taken me quite a while to even find that anything ever happened. That was the way it looked on the booster. However, in the spacecraft, that was another story. The only thing that was across the heat shield between the capsule and the vacuum of the thing, there was equivalent of 3 straps, which were equivalent to 3 number 14 wires. They must have vaporized immediately when the thing was hit. Okay, and there was an open umbilical. The lightning ran in there, blew every circuit breaker, every single circuit breaker, and these guys were sitting there in the dark. And they didn't do anything. They could still feel that the old booster was running. And finally, when we got to orbit, they turned the lights back on and reprogrammed the computer, and they got out at the proper time. And there was never another word said about scraping paint on the body. We never said another word. And today, though, still to this day, we know exactly how to survive lightning strikes. We got, I don't know whether the skyscrapers are still around, but we could probably train some more. And the shuttle, when a cloud comes up, it stops. Last time I heard, it cost $1 million a day just to sit on the ground down there waiting for an opportunity to launch. And so that's a problem. Another thing that I didn't answer a while ago, what is your favorite chip? Some people like tortilla chips, whatever, but one of the things that the military likes is ceramic chips. I've got 3 papers here that says that plastic chips are just as reliable and a whole lot cheaper. Came across my desk just the other day. Electronics. We're spending about 5 times as much for electronics as we need to. One of the reasons for that is we're using so-called grade 1 parts instead of grade 2 parts. Now, if you look at the difference between triple E parts, grade 1 and grade 2, there are 3 things that are different. One of them is that there's a couple of extra tests that are run. Another one is that the burning tests are repeated. It was already done in the grade 2 parts, but it's repeated because 20 years ago, a particular vendor failed to run the burning test, so they required it to be run again. That doesn't increase the reliability, it actually degrades it. To my knowledge, no other test. The rest of it is paper. Okay? The cost of doing the 2 extra tests, which is actually proof the situation, adds about 50% to the purchase price of the grade 2 parts. So what it says is that if you want the same reliability, repeat those 2 tests and you'll get there. There's no reason to go buy grade 1 parts. I did one study a few years back, found out we were spending $800 to save $1 in risk. I went to my boss with that, and he says, there's no way in this world I'm going to go tell my boss that I'm using grade 2 parts. We need to change the name. Okay. We didn't buy any reliability. OSC, in the TOS program, they are using these so-called upgraded grade 2 parts, and no problem. But they can do their own thing because they're private industry. Okay? And so we need to go back and look at electronics. Last thing, optimize autonomy. One of the things that always impressed me about the Gulf War that began a couple of years ago was the Tomahawks. It's basically an airplane that launched, and it goes goes off. It's got a computer inside, and it goes and finds the target with its own built-in map. Terribly clever little device. And probably one of the most interesting things that I recall out of that was that they launched several of them on a certain target in Baghdad, and they all essentially came up the same way. They went over and found a main highway up through the middle of Iran, and they blew up the highway and found a building and crashed into it. And here they were going chain fashion up through the main highway in Baghdad. And finally, the Iraqis got clever after a while and figured that they were coming through, and they shot down the last one the first time got through. That's autonomy. Pioneers. One of the things that you need to also remember about competition that we talked about is Goddard has an interesting way of doing jobs. First thing is that they have a nasty little habit of carrying all their GSE with them in an 18-wheeler down to the Cape. And they get off at the corner and they do their checkout, bullshit checkout, and then they basically carry it out and put it on the orbiter. They have a payload like that. They get very little involved with anybody else. It's very interesting ways of doing jobs, and I like the way they work. Last thing, of course, is the Hubble, and I'll shut up after this. Hubble has gotten a lot of criticism because it ended up with a faulty telescope and basically a faulty mirror. The thing I got to tell you is we still got to get back to basic engineering. Michelson interferometer was developed in 1870 something, 1872 I believe, and is still as accurate as anything there is going about making measurements. When you flunk one of those things, my degrees in physics, specialized in optics, so on and so forth. I believe, though, that I taught an awful lot of engineers when I was teaching lab courses about the Michelson interferometer, and I could not believe that the thing was allowed to fly when it had flunked one of those tests. Whatever the reason, there is absolutely no excuse. This is not new technology. The engineer is a professional. Tell them what you want done. Give them a little time to do a little learning and growing as necessary. But treat them as professionals. Don't build this humongous bureaucracy to look over their shoulder to see to it that they don't make mistakes, because the bureaucracy that's doing the looking is no smarter than that engineer. All you do is slow it down. And like was brought up before, the reason that the Saturn program was essentially as successful as it was because we took measured risk to reduce time and cost. There is no progress without risk, and there are no heroes without risk. Thank you very much.
We have time for a couple of questions.
You mentioned the management structure. A lot of the reports in Space News Nav Week talking about the space station redesign have mentioned the fact that they were supposed to look at the management structure of the program. In your position at Grumman, have you seen any activity in redesigning the management of Space Station Freedom as well as the hardware?
I have not been involved with the design team. The problem is that to go into this kind of thing is a very traumatic exercise for an old organization like this. And when you come in one go, you need to just fire everybody and start over again. And that's about what that amounts to. And they have not addressed that kind of a relationship.
You mentioned about the layers on layers of inspectors. And you also mentioned competition earlier. It seems like if you don't quite trust the engineer you have on the job, it seems like it's a lot better to just assign it to two groups, give them autonomy, and use that as your check rather than inspection.
You can only do that up to a certain point, okay? And normally it's a luxury you can't afford. Again, what Dr. Von Brown would do, he would carry it to the point that to come up the first 30 days and see what you would do, and then give it to somebody from a leadership standpoint from that point on. The guy that's a loser, a lot of times will come out the winner. A typical example is that Boeing lost the C-5A competition, and they made a heck of a lot more money on the 747, which was the loser, than Lockheed ever made on the C-5. So I don't really see that as being a bad kind of thing. It's a good learning process, and after a point in time, we cut that off, cut that competition off, and let the guy go. Any other questions?
Did they have a big experiment here?
I believe they have, and it's scheduled to be carried out in the not too distant future. The mission is on the books.
They didn't make a spare main mirror, they made a bifocal.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
really.
that's the correct system.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard they had 2 contractors making mirrors, main mirrors on this Kodak together from now.
Yeah, I'm not aware of.
There's a Kodak mirror, but it's on the ground and there's no way to get it up there, basically.
Yeah. The only thing I was talking about from my own standpoint, flight evaluation, I still go do that every time NASA has a failure. I go find out for myself what happened. And when I saw that picture of the test that was actually made of the earlier mirror that the guys here never saw, there was no way in the world that I agree that was okay.
Doesn't that question your conclusion about autonomy within programs? That information was not shared with NASA because the DoD kept that as an autonomous portion.
Okay, my answer to that is I do not believe in management by sitting at your desk. Okay. I always managed, I had to lie a lot of times, if you recall that, in order to get site visits, to go find out for myself what the contractor was doing. I could do that because I wasn't anybody in the program, I was an office chief or something. But Dick could not do that as a project manager. He couldn't go out and walk down the halls like I did. And I would never have gotten myself into a situation where I would rely on what the contractor told me officially. One of the things wrong with DRs, by the way, that they have to be approved normally by a corporate vice president. That runs a cost up by a factor of 5. You get the same piece of paper for a whole lot cheaper. It says the same thing if you just don't call it a DR. So I don't believe in paper management, paper review. I don't think you do either. I've seen you. You go out and you hustle. You were talking to Bernie yesterday on the phone before I left, and I heard Bernie's in the conversation. Okay, we're working some stuff. But anyway, that's the whole point, is don't sit at your desk and try to find out, if you're government, don't sit at your desk and try to find out what the contractor is doing. It won't work. If you don't want any surprises, you get out and you send your people into the contract site visit. That's the best kind of contractor-government relationship that there is. I don't like doing balls to me. Thank you very much.
Thank all of you for your patience. I apologize for not taking a break. We just had to reformat, change the format around. Before we leave, I want to reaffirm that there are many lessons from history. We look back 61 years ago, the British decided to build an airplane, racing airplane. That airplane eventually went to 400 miles an hour, and they built that airplane in 60 days. Right. About 10 years later, we needed another airplane, and that came the 251. That was built in 90 days. Right. We heard about an RFP, 12 pages. The V-2 rocket RFP was a half a page. The DC-3, the RFP was a half a page. So things can be done simpler, cheaper, and better. With the Jupiter rocket, it took about 3 years to design, build, and field a very complex weapon system. The Saturn I took about 3 years. And today we're looking at 8 years after we started our space station program. We're still trying to design it, and now we're starting over again. So I think the message there are better ways to do things. Let's go back and try to do it again that way. Thank you.